amendment to the U.S. Constitution would immediately patch the breach that has allowed the devastating rule of man back into our government. What exactly is the prime law? The prime law simply eliminates the use of initiatory force. All abuse of man-made laws require the use of initiatory force against its citizens. So without initiatory force, there can be no rule of man. Initiatory force, by the way, means initiating force. The prime law ends initiatory force and the threat of force. It's elegantly simple. 12visionsparty.com explains it all. Once you eradicate initiatory force, you eradicate the rule of man, and amazing things happen for the people. When you swipe away the thick regulatory and legislative rule of man in one swoop, then the pure and open freedom left behind allows entrepreneurs, businesses, sciences, technologies to soar ahead at rapid speeds never seen before. We'd experience a great technological revolution, the likes of which the world has never seen. Costs of goods would drop to fractions as buying power soared. Super entrepreneurs and super technologies racing ahead unhindered would immediately start driving down prices. We've seen isolated examples of this throughout history. Consider the computer revolution of the late 20th century. Computer buying power multiplied 1,000 times as computer consumers became computer rich. Another example happened during the early car industry, when Ford Motor Company invented the assembly line. Buying power multiplied dramatically through mass production, and that multiplying buying power spread throughout other industries as the production line brought the world mass production. Standards of living soared. Even before all that were the railroads. I have an example in the TVP platform of Maverick James J. Hill, who used his transcontinental railroad along the northern border of the United States to single-handedly multiply the standards of living of many, many poor Americans. This one man would have multiplied the buying power of our entire nation if not for the interference of the rule of man and its ruling class. In these three examples, we were experiencing prosperity explosions that happen in a vacuum, fairly free of rule of man. These great prosperity explosions were eventually killed by rule of man. As we eradicate the rule of man and its ruling class, we eradicate poverty. And something else amazing happens as technologies race ahead in all industries, as entrepreneurs, businesses, scientists race ahead unhindered, free of the thick regulatory web. The medical industry is no exception. Eradicating the rule of man, in turn, eradicates disease after disease. Costs of medicine and procedures fall. So, eradicating the ruling class eradicates poverty and eradicates disease, including making breakthroughs to slow down aging. There is yet another enormous benefit of eradicating the ruling class. This will eradicate crime and terrorism. You see, the prime law is the fundamental of protection. Imagine the full might and focus of government as a protection service against initiatory force or threat of force. First, there no longer be a deadly competition of funds between protection versus entitlements. Entitlement money buys votes, so that wins out in the end, jeopardizing national security. When the government focuses on its one and only proper purpose of protection against force or threat of force, then our country will evolve the greatest protection and peace the world has ever seen, as described in the TVP platform. Exactly how we would eradicate the rule of man and end its strengthening ruling class, by the way, is described in the timeless TVP platform. That TVP platform is at tvpnc.org. That's tvpnc.org. Those are the initials for our 12 Visions Party National Committee. That's tvpnc.org. Once we eradicate the rule of man, then we eradicate poverty, we eradicate disease, we eradicate crime and terrorism. The 12 Visions world begets wealth, health, peace, which is the title of the TVP manifesto. And the title of the TVP platform is no overstatement or gimmick either. The title of the TVP platform is Make All People Rich, Including the Poor. Literally, the TVP will make all people rich, including the poor. And you see how by reading the TVP's Get All the People Wealthy plan at 12visionsparty.com. It's time for people to begin to give notice to the 12 Visions Party and a rich America. Now I want to touch on what many people are afraid of, the debt our country and other countries are accumulating. The TVP's protection-only budget breaks from the rule of man and adheres to the prime law. Money is budgeted to protection only, the only valid purpose of government. You have to read the TVP platform at tvpnc.org to understand why the only valid purpose of government is protection. But imagine a budget that is restricted to and dedicated to protection only. Suddenly, our budget drops well over 50%. Just that alone gets our deficits and debt under control while increasing our safety. And as you'll see at 12visionsparty.com, we will also experience a prosperity explosion as all the man-made, debilitating regulations that have nothing to do with protection, lose their power over our economy. This all begins with a psychological shift to realizing our government exists for our protection and nothing else. With even the slightest move in this direction toward the protection-only budget and the prime law, the standards of living will start to rise. Why? Because economic freedom goes up, and therefore prosperity goes up too. Then the people will begin to personally and emotionally make the connection I stated earlier, that is, in the rule of man to launch the wealth of mankind. Now, let's express this message through an unlikely metaphor using a well-known diet, the Dr. Atkins diet revolution, the low-carbohydrate diet. For 30 years, the general public mostly ignored Dr. Atkins' scientifically sound main message that sugar is the body's scourge. Instead, people followed the highly touted fat-free diets as Americans' obesity continued to explode. Finally, after 30-something years, through Dr. Atkins' writings, dieters began to, one by one, pay attention to the message that sugar was their enemy. Sugar was so physically seductive that it had been hard to avoid. But more and more dieters finally faced reality and got the message firmly in their heads that the delicious, beckoning foods rich in carbohydrates, and particularly sugar, were the foods to avoid. They got on board with the low-carbohydrate diet, and their obesity began to vanish. Now here's the unlikely metaphor. Rule of man is sugar.